there, storytellers! Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, as you can tell, is going to be a very aesthetic, spring-inspired recommendations video. So I don't know how many of you out there in YouTube land are familiar with cottagecore, but basically it is an aesthetic, usually a fashion aesthetic, inspired by nature, light colors, airiness, florals, all that good stuff. Because it's an aesthetic, you can basically interpret it however you want. A lot of people associate it with autumn, but I have found you can associate it with either autumn or spring. So I decided to take the spring route today, and without any further ado, let's get into my recommendations. Just a quick disclaimer, I haven't actually read all of these books yet, but I did do a little bit of digging into each one, and I do think it solidly fits into the cottagecore spring vibe. So in no particular order, the first book I have is I Want to Be Where You Are by Kristina Forrest. Apart from the fact that the author's name fits the theme pretty well, and our main character has flowers in her hair, such as myself, this follows our main character Chloe, who is a ballerina who goes off on a trip with her annoying neighbor to try to make a ballet audition that her mother has forbidden her from going to. Chloe is absolutely positive this is the path for her. This is her one golden opportunity, and she's so upset with her mother for missing it. So she devises this plan to sneak out on her school break to go to the audition, and wackiness ensues because, of course, she misses the initial one and keeps trying to make the next one. I have started this one. I am 6 chapters in. So she's missed one audition, she's getting ready to go to another one, like I said, but it did seem like a really fun contemporary novel, which is why I picked it up, but it is set over an April break, so it is perfect for a springtime read because it is set literally in the middle of the spring, and there's just something very cottagecore about ballet in a way, because often a lot of the themes of ballet are very nature inspired and graceful and ethereal, and I think that fits cottagecore so well. So that is one recommendation for you. Next, I have Among the Beasts and Briars by Ashley Poston. This is a fantasy that follows our main character Carroll as she journeys into the forbidden forest outside her city in search of, what's her name? The Lady of the Wilds, to protect the city once again. I guess there was a deal with her to keep all her sort of wild creatures and crazy magic out and keep the city safe, and I think illness happens or something and the city sort of stops prospering. So she goes out in search of the Lady of the Wilds. I am assuming to sort of set things right. Something about a mysterious figure in the woods is something so cottagecore. So I thought this would be a perfect recommendation. Plus, look at these fabulous illustrations on the cover. It's got this crown made of roses and leaves that has antlers in it, and there's crows and a fox and roots and gold foiled leaves. It's just so aesthetic. Next we have what might also be a controversial pick for a cottagecore vibe, but it is Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers. Obviously, the Banks children live on Cherry Tree Lane, and their magical nanny Mary Poppins comes to sort of put their life in order, but she also takes them on these crazy magic-filled adventures. She's stern but caring, and she's the nanny we all need, really. But I did think something, especially about this cover, where she's just got her floral carpet bag and there's all the cherry blossoms floating by, and her pink scarf, and she's got like daisies around her hat, and her umbrella with the classic peacock handle. It's just something about Mary Poppins is very cottagecore to me, even though it really doesn't take place in a setting that would be deemed cottagecore, but maybe it's just that sort of nostalgic vibe that cottagecore gives. But either way, I think this would be a perfect read. Next, I have another that might be a little controversial like Mary Poppins was, and that is Persuasion by Jane Austen. Basically, you could go with any Jane Austen's books, and I think it would fit cottagecore in a way, again, for that nostalgic vibe. And they tend to live in the countryside, her characters, so there is that nature element. Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice loves taking long walks, so that fits. Mostly I said Persuasion because my particular copy has this very cottagecore type vibe to it to me. Pardon the bit of lighting change, I lost the sun and had to relight the frame. But my next recommendation is one I just did a reread of. I'm obsessed with it again right at the moment, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This, of course, follows Bilbo Baggins in Middle-earth as he takes a journey to the Lonely Mountain to help some dwarves reclaim their homeland. And there's a dragon, there's elves, there's orcs, there's tons of cottagecore vibes, especially in the Shire. They are a simple folk who don't like to concern themselves with the outside world. They like quiet and the comforts of home, a warm hearth, a good home, good food, good company, all of those vibes. And of course, they live in a very nature-based society. They grow their own food. They farm their own land. It's very spacious. It's full of fields and flowers, and I think it's called the water, but I think it's like a lake. But anyway, it's very cottagecore, Old English kind of vibes, and it's very much something that I think people should read in the springtime, because I always think of the Shire in the spring, and I can't think of somewhere I'd rather be in the spring than the Shire, so definitely read this one. Next, just to keep things interesting, I have a non-fiction recommendation, and it is called Fortunes in a Teacup by Jane Struthers. This is a book about the ancient art of tea leaf reading, basically divination through tea leaves. Makes me think of Professor Trelawney, but it also sort of suits the cottagecore aesthetic in the sense that I think of springtime and flowers and coziness when I think of tea, and that seems to fit the cottagecore vibe. Plus, look at some of the pictures in here. You can't get more cottagecore than this like old English looking window pane with this white ceramic teapot looking over the countryside. I think this is just a fun read for anybody who likes to get a little bit witchy. My next recommendation is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This obviously follows Peter Pan, the boy who would never grow up and never wanted to, along with Wendy and her brothers, who I can't remember the name of right now, as they get whisked off to Neverland by Peter and Tinkerbell, and they meet the Lost Boys and Captain Hook, and they have all kinds of adventures. But something about whimsical kids stories really just says cottagecore to me, especially these older ones that have those like nostalgic vibes to them. I don't know what it is about it that says that cottagecore, other than fairies, for some reason, always go with cottagecore for me, especially in these springtime-centric one. I do think this would be a great recommendation for anybody of any age because Peter Pan is such a fun character, and I think it suits cottagecore really well. Next, I have Wild Beauty by Anna-Marie McLemore. This follows a girl named Estrella, and by extension, her other family members, the other women in her family in particular, as they live on an estate called La Pradera, and basically they are a cursed group. If any of the women fall in love too deeply, their loves vanish. And so it's kind of bittersweet, but one day this boy shows up mysteriously in their gardens, and he can only remember the first 3 letters of his name. I think, Fel. Basically, it gives the women hope that maybe their loves aren't lost forever. It uncovers some more secrets of their family and lineage. It seems a little bit sad and a little bit dark, so it's not quite totally whimsical, but this cover with all of these different pink and purple and blue flowers on it, and this girl leaning over the garden, just the silhouette of her in gold, next to the title in gold. It's all very cottagecore, and I feel like even though it's not necessarily the lightest of themes, it definitely fits the cottagecore vibe. Next, we have another that would be qualified as a children's classic, and that is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This obviously follows our main character Alice as she falls down the rabbit hole, chasing the white rabbit, down into Wonderland, where she encounters the Mad Hatter, the Queen of Hearts, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, Absalom, all of those characters, and she gets whisked off on this crazy adventure where everything's a little bit trippy, and I haven't read it, but I do know the story, and I've seen the live action movie. I haven't seen the original animated one for whatever reason, but I do always enjoy the story, so why I haven't read it yet, I don't know. But I do think that sort of countryside setting that the story starts out in, and all of these settings within the whimsical world of Wonderland totally fit the cottagecore vibe, but in that kind of trippy, weird way. It's not that exact match where it's all nature vibes and flowers, but something about it just fits. Next, I have The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This follows our main character, Jude, who gets whisked off to the court of the fairy when she is like 10 years old, and I think it follows her journey with Prince Carden, who is not a very nice prince, hence the title. And I think basically it's just the story about these fae folk who are kind of not nice. And I don't know exactly what adventure she goes out on. So she's trying to win a place in the palace court and risking her life to do so, all that crazy adventure goodness. But I really love Holly Black's writing. I read the Spiderwick Chronicles, which she wrote with Tony DeSerzilli. I think I said that right. I read those when I was a kid. I love those books still to this day. I wish I owned my own copies. I don't, but I absolutely love them, and I loved the way those two wrote fae folk and magical creatures, so I have no doubt that I will love this trilogy, plus its companion novella. I think it's a novella, or it's a grouping of stories. How the King of Elfham Learned to Hate Stories, basically, is the companion to the Folk of the Air trilogy, but something, like I said, about cottagecore in springtime makes me think of fairies, so a fairy-based trilogy seemed perfect. We're getting down to our last few here, but the next one I have is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This follows our main character, Alice, whose mother goes missing one day, leaving her a mysterious note saying, "Do not go into the Hazelwood," which is the estate that her grandmother lived on. I think her grandmother's dead. Her grandmother is a recluse, a well-published author of a grouping of dark fairy tales called Tales from the Hinterland, which is a book that was just published this year, I believe, also by Melissa Albert. So she gave us those stories, but I haven't actually read Hazelwood yet, so I haven't gotten to it. At any rate, Alice goes to the Hazelwood, so she ignores her mother's note because she's trying to find her mom. So she goes to the only place she can think of to start, which is the Hazelwood, and she gets entangled into all the darkness, and she allies with an annoying classmate, Ellery Finch, who has his own reasons for wanting to help her. It seems sort of dark and mysterious, but also possibly with some fair folk involved, definitely fairy tales involved. The cover is kind of a dark cottagecore, so I did wrestle with whether I wanted to save this for a future video, because I do plan to do a fall-based cottagecore video down the line of all my books that I think that fit the cottagecore vibe, but for fall. So I wrestled with where to put this one, but because it was predominantly woods focused, the Hazelwood, I felt like it could go in the spring one, even though it was a little bit darker. Next to last, I have another nonfiction for you, and that is called World of Wonders, in Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments by Aimee Nezhukumatathil. I actually remember my process for selecting this book, and I mean, just to have in general, not for this video. I will explain my thought process there in a second. But I got an email from Barnes & Noble just saying, "This is the book of the year. Do you want it?" And so I took a look at it, and I was totally sold by this cover that has these beautiful illustrations of all these animals on here. We have a whale shark, I think, a flamingo, I think a squid. We have an axolotl, butterflies, and plants, all kinds of plants. And I remember thinking, I don't know what this book is about at all. And I read the description, and it still wasn't totally clear because they were being kind of vague, I think on purpose. So I was thinking, okay, I'll flip through the pages that they let you preview. And all I saw were some of these beautiful illustrations. Here's an octopus. and I love the illustrations. I might just have to get it just because. And I thought it was something along the lines of the Teacup book, where I would be getting a sort of nonfiction book about animals, that it would be something about each little animal that's included, like essays, but it's not, and it is, but it's not. So Aimee Nezhukumatathil is a poet, and this is her memoir in a way, and in a way it's not. So each little section is focused on an animal or a plant, wherein she talks about how it personally relates to her and her life, how each of those creatures or plants is meaningful to her, and she relates it to her own memoir and stories. So you do get her memoirs as she tells you about these creatures, but you do get to learn a little bit about them as well. And even if you didn't know she was a poet, you would figure it out from the first few pages. Her prose is so beautiful and lyrical. I was totally sucked in. It could have been about anything and I would have read it. It's so gorgeous, but it's totally nature focused, 100%. So to me, it was, you couldn't get more cottagecore in a nonfiction than this one. And last but not least, we have A Song of the Sparrow by Lisa Ann Sandell. Now, I knew about Arthurian legend prior to reading this book, but this is the novel that got me into Arthurian retellings and Arthurian legend in general. It kicked off the obsession. It's a retelling of Arthurian legend. It focuses on Elaine of Astolat and her story. Of course, in traditional Arthurian legend, Elaine is not actually a main character. She's kind of a throwaway character in traditional Arthurian legend, but in this novel, she gets her own story, and it does start with her being interested in Lancelot, but it progresses past that, and she progresses as a character. You get to know her as this strong-willed, independent girl who does a lot for her father and brothers, as well as for the camp of soldiers in Arthur's care. She's Arthur's friend, so she builds a rapport with the once and future king. It's a really good novel, and she ends up being a major player in it, naturally, because it is her own. It is told in verse, which is a fun fact. It's one of the, no, I think it's the first verse novel I ever read as well. So it was a lot of firsts for me, but she's got this beautiful crown of leaves in her hair. The cover is very cottagecore aesthetic, as is a lot of the setting. It takes place out in nature because they're an army on the move, so they're in camps along a river, in fields, all kinds of that good stuff. So you get that aesthetic vibe that you're looking for with this novel. But that is it for all of my cottagecore recommendations. If you have any books that you think fit the cottagecore vibe for spring especially, let me and everyone else know down in the comments. I would love to see your recommendations and get some more ideas for spring vibes that I can read, because I'm very much into the cottagecore spring vibe at the moment, especially because I just reread The Hobbit recently. So that is it for this one. I'm going to go. If you want to keep up with me and all of my bookish adventures, you should go ahead and click the subscribe button. And if you are interested in more spring-based content, I highly recommend that you ring the little bell so that you don't miss a beat, but especially so you don't miss my April bullet journaling video. Coming up the first Friday in April, I am going to be doing a Tolkien-inspired spring spread for April, and I'm super excited about it. I have tons of supplies. I very heavily leaned into the planning and theme of this one, so it's going to be a little bit more intensive than my last two bullet journaling videos, but I'm very excited about it. You should also ring the bell so that you get my March Owl Crate unboxing, because it's not here yet, but it should be before the end of the month, so you should get it as that last March video. I'm debating whether or not I want to give you my March wrap-up with my April wrap-up, or whether or not I want to give it to you on Instagram. So you should definitely subscribe and ring the bell so that you don't miss my updates. I will let you know for sure where I'm going to post it, so you can keep an eye out for it. But for now, I'm going to go. I will see you guys on the next one. I post videos every Friday. Bye!